And you were kind of talking about before, their rationale for the search warrant on Breonna Taylor was, they thought that she might be facilitating a drug dealer, or he might have kept some of his product at her apartment. But damn, do they spend a lot of money investigating drug dealing? Not a lot of money. How do we get these people jobs? How do we get investment into the community? How do we get mental health services into the community? If they spent the amount of money that they do on the police, on the equipment, on the terrorism, on just basic jobs programs, I don't say training because I think that's a bullshit neoliberal thing, but just trying to help this community, same thing for Detroit, Flint, Milwaukee, Cleveland, a lot of places we go. I mean, you would see crime dip way down. That part of the discussion I haven't heard as much at these protests. I haven't heard also about, yeah, we could do protests, around the block for months and months and months, but what about organized boycotts? What about divestment? Has that been something organizers and activists here have spoken about?
Yeah, we've been talking about divestment. We kind of lobbied the person, Councilman Bill Hollander, who's in charge of our budget as far as the committee goes at the Metro Council level. And it didn't work. It did not work. I don't think people were ready to wrap their minds around what it meant to defund police or divest from police, which is what I always advocate for, and taking those funds and allocating them elsewhere. But going back to transactional versus transformational, LMPD perpetuates drug dealers and drug users. And before I say how, I just want to zoom back out and go back some decades. We fought, 60s, the civil rights era, somewhat progression. 70s, deindustrialization, where so many factories were shut down in the inner city, so many certification programs taken out of our high schools. 80s, we get hit with the crack epidemic that devastated black communities, just completely destroyed families left and right, and they were already jobless. So now you got this drug that you can sell to put food on the table, or you can smoke it because you have no hope in life. And then you go to the 90s, where we have our Bill Clinton, who so many people when I was growing up said he was basically our first black president, I guess because he played the saxophone, but he devastated black families with the crime bill. And then we get to the 2000s. Biden, by the way. Yes, which we could talk about forever. But I said all that to say this, just decades of essentially defunding our communities, defunding our lives, and so much investment in police. In Louisville alone, about $256 million goes between our officers and corrections. We've got $250 million being put into caging people. Less than a quarter of that is put into caring for people. But I say they perpetuate the issue because why are we spending $250 million kicking in the door of a petty drug dealer or petty offender, petty crimes? Why don't we put those resources, if you really want to stop it, put those resources into the jobs like you were saying, but also we don't control the trains and the planes and the automobiles that ship these drugs to our country. So if you really want to stop what you claim you want to stop, and why you're dumping millions upon millions and billions as a country into police, you need to go to the borders. You need to holler at your friends, U.S. government, in Mexico, who are helping get these drugs here, or in Colombia, where that crack is being made. That's your issue. You open up the borders to make that happen. But they're worried about a Breonna Taylor who was allegedly involved in selling drugs, instead of worrying about the root of the issue, which is not only the fact that we have a lack of opportunity and resources, but also the fact that you have perpetuated, Ronald Reagan as a president in the 80s has perpetuated the crack epidemic.
And I find it, I cover national politics, and one part of the media says the Republicans are terrible, the other part says the Democrats are terrible, but in reality, there's not so much distance from the two parties. I mean, Democrats better on some socialists, this and that, but economically, a lot of these areas that are depressed have had Democratic rule for decades and decades and decades, and those Democrats, the color that they focus on most is green, getting those dollars from the donors, the Chamber of Commerce, real estate developers, this and that. And as a result, they'll throw little murals, Black Lives Matter Plaza, Black Lives Matter on the ground. In New York City, Bill de Blasio, a Democrat, just defunded the police by $1 billion, which was just kind of an accounting trick. They're not actually cutting the police budget. So the problem is, you have this Republican Party, which has been steeped in racism and white supremacy, Nixon, the Southern strategy, but you have the Democratic Party that's kind of been enabling. I say Nancy Pelosi drove the getaway car when Trump and McConnell just robbed the Treasury. So if you have this two-party system that one is just hostile to black people, the other one gives lip service to black people, what do you do outside of electoral politics? And that's asking someone that just got elected.
And I ran as a Democrat. I don't have any marriage to any party. And if our local Democratic Party saw this, they would probably be at my neck, and I don't care because I don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies. I have permanent interest. And I got on Metro Council not to make friends anyway, but to make progress. So I've always heard that the Republicans were wolves and that the Democrats were wolves, but they just had on sheep's clothing. Or that the Republican will call you the N-word today and the Democrat will call you N-word next week. That they're one and the same, they just have different tactics. But it's going to take a whole lot of political education to move away from that two-party system. Because even in this district, District 4 in Louisville, Kentucky, which is the most populated, most diverse, most vibrant district, the most powerful district, because we have the entire downtown business district in this district. There were over 13,000 registered Democrats, roughly about 3,000 Republicans, and less than 1,000 independents. I couldn't have won this race if I didn't participate in that two-party system, and more specifically, if I didn't participate as a Democrat. And it's going to take generations of education to get people out of that mindset, because as you said, they're really one and the same, just different tactics.
What happens, if the election were held today? Looks like Joe Biden would be the winner, according to the polls. It ain't breaking news that Trump is violent, Trump is racist, all these things. I also don't think it's breaking news that Joe Biden is just a different kind of racist, a less in-your-face racist, a less Twitter era racist, but the policies are certainly racist. The ignorance is certainly racist. But what happens, if Biden wins? A lot of these white allies now that are out in the streets with black people, are they going to be challenging Joe Biden in the Democratic Party the next time a black person is killed sleeping in bed and there's another Department of Justice investigation, but nothing happens? Remember, it was President Obama's DOJ that began the investigation into Eric Garner's killing. Nothing. That officer wasn't prosecuted. I remember I was at Standing Rock. That was a Native issue, but grenades fired at Native Americans, tear gas, freezing rain, and nothing happened. Obama said, well, we'll let it play out. Ferguson, this and that. I guess my question is, are people going back to sleep once it's a Democratic president, once it's, if it's a Democratic Congress, because, the federal level could do a lot to really implement reforms, not only of the police, but actually have some programs for black people, not just coming around to churches around election time.
That's why lineage matters. On my refrigerator for my almost 3-year-old, there are these magnet puppets. We got Frederick Douglass, we got Langston Hughes, Rosa Parks is up there, Maya Angelou. But on our dishwasher, there's a finger puppet by himself, and that's President Barack Obama. And I originally got it because I wanted him to look at it and see himself and think, I can be the president of the United States one day. But the more that I learn and the more that I grow and expand my mind politically, I realize he can't, because Barack Obama does not have lineage of being a descendant of slavery. He actually descends from Confederates who sold slaves and who owned slaves. He has a father from Kenya and he has a mother from Kansas. He doesn't know It's not in his veins, it's not in his blood to fight this fight. And we expected him to, because he was clapping at the churches, because he used some of our slang, because he listened to Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar. We got tricked and we fell asleep. And he didn't pass any laws or do anything of substance for black people. But going back to what I said about the CBC, he did a whole lot for everybody else, including police. You got to look Barack Obama up. Blue Lives Matter. I don't know what the bill was called, but look up Barack Obama, Blue Lives Matter, and read for yourself. And what we saw during his presidency was a peak. The viralness of a Mike Brown, of a Trayvon Martin. And he didn't do anything about it. Even going back to economic conditions, Barack Obama said he didn't believe in reparations, which Mitch McConnell used that as an excuse when he was asked about reparations and said, I share the same sentiment as President Barack Obama. SBA loans under President Bush, who I don't rock with, so don't get it twisted, we got 9% of the federal loans, which we should get 13% if we're 13% of the population or more. But under Barack Obama, we got like 2%. HBCU funding was down. And the cherry on top of all of that disaster of a Barack Obama's presidency was the fact that he made Joe Biden his VP, the man who penned that crime bill that put more black men in jail today in this country than there are women in jail in the entire world. That was his vice president. And now we're about to have him as a president, potentially. But we still got folks with Barack Obama's picture in their homes, him and Michelle and their family. I don't miss Barack, and I didn't vote for Barack. And we have to be careful with symbols over substance, because he was a symbolic president. And as we saw, that symbolism wasn't enough to keep Breonna from getting killed, to keep David from getting killed, to keep Ahmaud Arbery from getting killed, to keep George Floyd from getting killed. We got tricked. We got bamboozled. We got flim-flam with a Barack Obama. And I can't wait for the day, even though Tupac said, even though it seems heaven sent, we ain't ready to have a black president, for us to have our real first black president, who by black, I mean descends from slavery, descends from Jim and Jane Crow, descends from mass incarceration, the crack epidemic, police terrorism, who descends from the blood, sweat, and tears that built this country, because he is not that. He is not African American, which is a phrase that makes no sense. And it was created because we don't know where in Africa we came from, but we are American. Unfortunately, we are Americans who descend from slavery. But once we get fixed, because we were broken, we can cut the rest of that off and just be American like everybody else who has been accepted into this country. And in some cases, those people who have been accepted, like Barack, look like us, but they don't live like us.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com, where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.
Status Coup.